Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Best Practices series from Netwrix. Today, we're going to help you identify and secure sensitive data. My name is Scott Andrews. I'm a solutions engineer here at Netwrix. I got my colleague Graham Sims here today as well. Mike's maybe stopping through a little bit later. We'll see what happens. He's a busy man, so be on the lookout for him. Many of you know him, and I know plenty of you on the call are already existing customers. So welcome. We're just going to go ahead and dive into a couple things to get through before we get started. Of course, always housekeeping. We're going to send you the recordings and the slides at the end of the session. You can submit your questions anytime. We'll do Q&A all throughout or at the end, worst case. So don't hesitate to throw questions out there. Probably take up to about an hour, probably depend on how many questions we get. We're probably expecting a few, so go ahead and ask those. Don't worry about it. Worst case, we'll get back to you after the session if there's too many. I have had that happen before. So what we're going to talk about today and in the future, we're going to help you get security insights that matter. And so today, again, we're going to be doing the 10th of March identifying and securing sensitive data webinar. Of course, April and May is coming up, detecting and responding to breaches and threats, validating internal controls, improving regulatory compliance. So some other great sessions coming up. Don't hesitate to get registered for those as well. So our whole entire best practices series. And then we're really just kind of going to get into it here. So again, we're going to help you ID and secure data. Now, again, I know a lot of you are existing Netwrix Auditor users, whether that's for Active Directory or File Server or both. File Server is going to be really the piece we're kind of focused on today. Now, again, Auditor's a really wide and encompassing platform that covers all kinds of different sources. So if you are new to Netwrix, there's a bunch of different options of other ways we can help you monitor different sources in your environment. But again, today we're really going to focus in on File Server. So if we jump in here, what we're going to start with is basically kind of just an overview of what we do with file servers. So when your users are using these file servers, the folders, the files, or the administrators are making configuration changes, we're going to get an audit trail on that. And if we go to the file server activity, we can see those records in report format. So what we might do is start with an all file server activity report. You'll see these reports will have filters that will help you find and whittle these reports down into more pertinent information that maybe you're after. Now, I could always in this report just look for, say, files that were added. Now, that's going to be a really broad kind of look. You can see I have a bunch of reads turned on. There's a copy. There's a file being added. So I can definitely detect when files are being, added to the environment. Do I know what's in that file? Not at this point. Of course, I could always go over there and manually read it. But short of that, I just know it's in a pretty secure location, but I don't really know what's in it or if it needs to be maybe even more secure. So what else I can do is maybe focus on specific things around the permissions of these folders. Once I identify this information, I could always say, just come to files and folders created, see that kind of information directly. Now, I might want to kind of automate something like this a little bit more. So I have some other sessions open here of Auditor. One is a search where I'm just looking in the file server data source here for files being added. So I could come to this search and run this anytime I want and see, new information come up as it comes up. And then I could also just take this one step further and make a subscription out of this. So I'll make this full screen a little easier to see. So for a subscription with Netwrix, we can, drop an email or a file to a file share option about, say, files added to the accounting share in this example. So new files in the accounting share from yesterday. So on this subscription, I have it set up as daily. So whoever's on this recipients list, you can see I am. It could be a group. whoever's on that list will get an email about all the files that have been added to the accounting share. And if you see here, I have the actual email results here, the report that's included. So you could always, again, see these files being added and identify these files. You can come back and check the permissions around these folders and file shares. Again, Netwrix will give you kind of a wider picture. You know, we can get you there some of the way, but the picture is incomplete, I feel like. So what we might do is, you know, just kind of pass it over to Graham to see how we might be able to find, you know, where that or what that data is, what's inside of it. So let me go ahead and pass the presenter over to Graham here, and we'll get him going.
Okay, go ahead. I think we are. Hopefully you can see my screen now. Hi, everyone. So what you can see here, this is the product Netwrix data classification. This is Netwrix's solution that allows you to analyze your content automatically based on rules, based on how you've configured the system, and automatically assign categories to that content. So I'll give you a brief overview of how this all works. So basically, there's three kind of key tasks that you're going to be doing. You're going to define your sources, the things that you're going to scan. You're going to set up and you're going to monitor your rules, which are behind taxonomies, sets of rules. And you can analyze, you can look at the results and you can see what's going on here. So I'm going to dig a little bit into this. So basically, and I'm not going to dwell too much on this because it's pretty straightforward and pretty prosaic. You set up whatever sources you want to crawl within your Netwrix data classification system. And as you can see, we cover a whole lot. Probably the most common ones tend to be Windows file shares, SharePoint, SharePoint Online, Exchange. We're getting a lot more people interested in doing the online cloud storage systems, Google Drive Box, Dropbox, which is available but not in my list for some reason. And it's pretty easy to set up. You pick your source. There'll be a few configuration options to type in. In the case of a file share, you just put in the folder path, and then you hit save, and off it goes and crawls all of that content. So that's the first thing it does. And one of the key things about the Netwrix data classification system is when it's crawling that content, it's actually doing similar to a search engine might do. It's building an index of that. And that's pretty important for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it allows you to interact with the content. It allows you to get a good idea of what you're seeing, what the results are going to be, how the results are going to work. Okay, so let's dig in a little bit to exactly how we determine it. So Netwrix comes, so the Netwrix data classification, it's a generic classification system. So it can, classify to whatever rules you want to set up. But what it does is it comes out of the box with a bunch of predefined taxonomies that we create to map against various types of sensitive information, various particular standards, various particular compliance you might want to match to. So we've got everything from, financial data through PCI DSS, health data, personal health information, personally identifiable information, and we also have taxonomies for various standards out there, CCPA, GDPR, that sort of thing, which helps customers map their data to how they need to be compliant to those particular systems. Okay, so let's go in here a little bit and look a bit about detail about how this all works. So let me pick, I'm going to go start off with something pretty simple. Okay, so the way that the Netwrix data classification system works, it's an evidence-based system. So a lot of systems kind of function as kind of a Boolean yes, no result type system. But because what you're dealing with a lot of the time here is it's natural language, it's unstructured content, And so often there's a lot of gray area in what it's doing. So the Netwrix data classification system uses a scoring system to allow you to build up evidence that a particular document matches a particular term. In this case, does this document contain a credit card number, and specifically a Visa credit card number? And so the first thing at the top is what's called a regular expression. If you're familiar with them, you may have groaned. If not, you're probably very confused by what's this top line on the screen. Essentially, it is a way of matching patterns. So everybody's kind of familiar that, you know, a credit card number is 16 digits, 4 groups of 4 typically, but there are restrictions onto which numbers can be where. And so the idea here is that you're looking to match that sort of pattern, but be as precise as you possibly can be, because you can understand that if you just matched every 16-digit number that you had in all of your documents and say, hey, look, there's a credit card number, you're going to get a whole bunch of false positives. And when you get too many false positives, the actual use of the system drops right down, because you know, you're spending as much time wading through those false positives to find the actual genuine matches as you would be without a system. So the first thing we're doing is we're trying to restrict this pattern as well as we can. Some cases you can do it reasonably well. Credit cards actually are reasonably good because there are restrictions, but then you get things like passport numbers, driver's license numbers, which are sometimes just, hey, it's a 9-digit number, could be anything. Okay, so that's the first thing. We also support validation checks, which are typically kind of checksum type algorithms that can be applied, again, to validate that this is a valid number. And then on top of this, what we're looking for is kind of supplementary information, other evidence within the document that this is actually a credit card, not some other number. So here we've got a few kind of words that we're looking for nearby. We've also, this term boost is actually linking to another term, which is used by everything, okay? Which is actually in various languages, looking for credit card number, maybe maybe a pound sign, that sort of thing, all that sort of information nearby. Or in fact, if, you know, for foreign language stuff, we can look for the same sort of stuff in other languages as well. So when a document's processed, it gets run against all of these rules in every single term, and the scores of those matching rules all get added up. And if the sum of all those scores is 50 or higher, then we apply the term. But you can optionally potentially, you know, alter that sensitivity. You could make it more sensitive, less sensitive, and that's kind of a way that you can, you know, test and validate and see what's going on. So what I can see here, there's a little bit more information. So that gives you a rough overview of the clues and how they work. We have a whole bunch of different types of clues that we support. So what you've seen here is regex and standard, which we can use case sensitive, which is fairly self-explanatory. We can also do clues against the existing metadata of the document. So that can be anything from tags that a user may have applied, but it also includes things like the file name of the document and that sort of thing, which, depending on what you're looking for, can be used as evidence of what you're trying to find. Okay, so as part of this particular interface, which is really designed for people who are, you know, setting up the system, validating, you know, and subject matter experts validating, hey, what we're finding is good, we're not getting a lot of false positives and that sort of stuff. I can then hit this little browse tab, and this will show me what documents have I found within my data that, you know, match this particular term. So I can review what I'm getting here. I can decide, hey, these look pretty good. You know, there's some test data, including, you know, zipped up test data. So it demonstrates that we can go inside those archive files and find out what you're getting. But it's finding kind of reasonably accurate and good numbers. And so once I've done that validation, and most of the time you'll be able to do it pretty quickly, you can kind of move on and carry on with your work. So that's kind of like a very, very high level, quick overview of how the system works. So the process that you tend to be doing and what tends to kind of get where you tend to interact with this interface most. So we have customers who get the system, plug in the taxonomies they want, let it go, off it goes, scans their content, gives them results, and that meets their needs. But we also have a lot of other customers who kind of like dig into the results and want to validate what's going on. So let me give you kind of an example. So I dig into our personally identifiable information, and I go down into the USA, and here's a common one that everybody tends to look for. This is US Social Security numbers. So again, you have in this format, you see it a lot. It's not in all of them, but it's pretty similar. It's a pattern that we're looking for that matches Social Security number and other language that you're likely to find nearby that's going to help determine if this is actually a valid Social Security number or not. So again, I can go to the Browse tab, and here, again, I can review and I can see, which documents have I got that are actually matching things. And here, I've got this one at the bottom here, which is just kind of an engine bomb, bill of materials spreadsheet. And that kind of thing, let me pull that document up so you can kind of see. So this is kind of like, it's a little bit of a contrived example of where the system might kind of like out of the box, not necessarily work great for you. If you're an engineering organization, you're going to have things like part numbers, some of which may look suspiciously like Social Security numbers, right? And if you're very unlucky, there might be some language in there which also happens to look like some of the evidence as well. So, you've got kind of a double whammy there. It kind of found a pattern, and it had language that looked like, it might also be a Social Security number. So it actually flagged this document as containing a Social Security number when it clearly doesn't. So what I can do with that, okay, is I can go in here and again, because it was a BOM, a bill of materials, it was mentioning, part numbers and quantities and that sort of thing. So I can go back to my clues and I can say, okay, let's put in there. I've got a lot of, bills of materials, and so this kind of thing might happen, more than once. So I can go in there and I can put in a score, but I can give it a negative score to say, okay, if I find part number in there, it's less likely to be a genuine Social Security number, even if you do find something that looks like a Social Security number. So I can go in here and I can insert that, and picking the scores, it's a little bit of a, of a learned experience to figure out how to do this. But, generally the way you want to be doing this, is like I said, it's an evidence-based system. So the stronger the evidence, the higher the number's going to be. And if it's positive evidence that it should be tagged, it'll be positive. If it's negative evidence that it shouldn't be tagged this way, it'll be a negative number. So again, now immediately, one of the things about the classification, data classification, is it's kind of a relatively time-consuming process to do everything. If I want to go ahead and reclassify all of my documents, that to find out, to check that I validated and did something that made a sensible change, that's going to take a while. We don't want to have to do that every time we make a change. So what I can do here is I can hit this little show movements checkbox and re-hit the filter. And what that actually did is that had the system go ahead and rescore just these 12 documents that I'm seeing on the screen at the moment, and based on the changes I just made. So you can see here that most of these, are essentially staying the same based on what the classification engine saw, but the one at the bottom, my bill of materials, the score dropped down below the 50 threshold that it needs to classify. So it will no longer get classified with this particular term. So I've kind of gone through the process of spotting an issue and resolving it. And again, you can spot the issues through this Browse tab by looking at the results. You can see the results actually in the system and come and say, okay, this is a document that I'm having an issue with. You can find it within the system, and then you can go ahead and fix that issue. Okay, so that's kind of the standard taxonomies and kind of a little bit of an overview of how you would go in to kind of use the power of the Netwrix data classification to actually find your false positives and fix them. That's kind of a capability that's relatively unique to the Netwrix brand. The technology comes, like I said, from a general classification system. So it has a lot of capabilities to support you in being able to fix problems if and when they arise within your classification, which is often a kind of a pain point for people, because if you get a data for classification system and it has a bunch of baked in rules that you can't change, then if it gets something wrong, you're stuck to going back to manually doing it, or you're just living with the fact that it's going to misclassify a bunch of your stuff. So we can fix and we can enhance the out-of-the-box taxonomies. We can also potentially create additional taxonomies to do other tasks that might want to do within our organization. So part of my process of securing my content is to be able to essentially delete content that's no longer needed by the organization, reducing that attack service. And the common acronym that's used for that is ROT, redundant, obsolete, and trivial content. I'll talk about redundant a little bit later because it's dealt with by a little bit of mechanism, but let's show you an example of how a couple of ways that you might actually look at kind of looking for those obsolete documents that you can, in fact, potentially get rid of. So the very simple way, which a good number of customers that we have use, is purely base the decisions on how old document is or how long since a document's been accessed. So you can create rules within Netwrix data classification to say, okay, if the modification date is essentially less than 10 years before today, then tag that document with this particular term. So if I had any documents that hadn't been modified for 10 years, then they would be flagged under here. In the same way, you can look for access dates. So that gives you a pretty coarse way, but a good way of finding documents that are old or haven't been used for a long time, which is a good starting point for saying, hey, can we get rid of some of this stuff? Getting more more sophisticated than that, you can potentially start, if you have a record retention plan, or you actually have ways, an official way of deciding what sort of documents you keep and how long you keep them. You can use the Netwrix data classification platform to actually go ahead and identify different types of document. So in this case, I've done a couple of little examples here. I've got a simple example again here. I want to find all of the invoices I've got, regardless of what they are. And here, it's simply going ahead and saying, okay, does the word invoice occur in the file name? As it happens, it tends to be a human trait that when people are creating files, they often put some sort of evidence about what type of file they are in the file name. If it's a statement of work, you'll see SOW in the file name more times than not. So this is a good, simple, easy way to start it, but it's not going to find everything. If there's a invoice that's been generated by a system and it's just got a number, 345.pdf, then this wouldn't find it. So you can get more advanced than that. Okay, and here would be an example of things you might be able to do. So this here is using a whole bunch of those standard clues, looking in the documents to see, looking for language that is likely to be within an invoice. So, some form of invoice number, good chance that'll be in there. These sort of phrases, bill to, payment terms type language is likely to be on there. It's going to be prices and quantities. All this sort of language is going to be common. Not every piece of this is going to appear in every invoice, but the idea is enough of it will appear in them that it'll get up to that 50 points it needs in order for it to trigger, hey, this is an invoice. And so, yeah, we can take a quick look, and I've got some kind of samples in here. But, so it's picking up things here like this one, which doesn't have invoice in the file name, but because it mentioned enough of that language, it's still got tagged at this is an invoice. Okay, so once your system's gone through, you've got your taxonomies, you've set them up, you've tweaked them, and you're happy, how does that give you, what do you then do from then on? So that's kind of where we go to kind of the reporting area. So this is kind of like a new sensitive files report, which gives you an overview of, how much total documents have I processed, how many of them contain sensitive information based on these taxonomies I've set up. So here you can see that, and I get an idea of where are my sensitive files. I get an idea of what sort of sensitive files am I finding. I'm finding a whole bunch of stuff. I mentioned CCPA, a little bit of health stuff, but that gives me a little bit of an idea what particular terms are the most common that I'm finding in here, and how old is this data that I'm looking at that contains sensitive data. and I can drill down a little bit. I can click on the PII term, and it's going to go ahead and it's going to bring up a list of all of the documents I've got that contain personally identifiable information. I can, and again, I can fiddle around this. I can say, well, I want to see which terms they matched. I can just go all of them, right? Oh, maybe it doesn't. So yeah, I can go ahead and I know I have social security numbers. So I can say, do that, and it will give me just the ones that contain social security numbers. So again, this is a way to use the NDC terminal to review those results that you're getting. The other common way to use this information, and again, this is relying on that index that we talked about early on, is to do DSAR requests, data subject access requests. So somebody's coming in, they said, we want to know all of the information that you have about us. So I can go ahead and I can say, I give it a case ID, and I know something I know exists. Maybe. Okay, the references here would be for kind of numeric identifiers, account numbers, social security numbers, other sorts of national insurance number IDs. Okay, and I just submit that. And by default, it'll be queued and it'll be run. They all tend to get run overnight. And then in the morning, you get the results. And you can see here's a set of documents that match that particular content. And you can, based on the thing, actually export a zip file containing all of those documents. So that's kind of like a quick overview of how you can use the Netwrix data classification system to identify your sensitive data, validate that it's finding the right stuff, and get a quick overview of what's being returned. Now I'm going to hand back to Scott, who's going to show how that information gets back into the Netwrix Auditor system.
All right, hello everybody. Great information, Grant, appreciate that. So we'll get going, get my screen shared back out. All right, everybody should see Netwrix Auditor 996. Now earlier we kind of showed, we can see when files get added, we can, see some of that activity, but again, we don't know what's in there. But Graham showed us a perfect way to kind of find out what's inside the content of these files. And then the two products, Auditor, which again you may already own, can be tied back to the same Netwrix data classification information. And now we can also see that information here on this side of things. So again, if I come in reports, earlier we looked at just the regular file server reports, and this would be just general file information. So say everything you're monitoring with Netwrix Auditor when it comes to file shares. Now up here in the data discovery and classification folder, there's another file server's set of reports, and this is the reports that's tied to the Netwrix data classification data as well. So where we might start is just kind of see how much we have. So you'll see in my lab, I also have Netwrix data classification identifying all kinds of different, sensitive file types, whether that's financial records or PCI or HIPAA data. So very similar to what Graham had going, and you can see now I know kind of exactly what I have. So nice kind of start here. I can dig in and kind of find, where this PCI data goes to. If I want to go down the rabbit hole here, I can start seeing it broken down by location if I want. Now, if I come back out here, what I really might want to do is just see who's touching this data. So I can see, say, the activity related, not just to any file, but now just the sensitive files. So you can see here's a report, looks very similar to what we were already seeing, but now we have a whole new subset of categories. So say that could be cleanup or PCI, or it's GLBA data if you're a bank, California Consumer Protection Act there. So whatever classifications you've set up in the Netwrix data classification, we can now match that audit trail from the same file share locations to the sensitivity of the file. So it makes it really nice. Now, what you can do to kind of take this one step further is maybe even subscribe to this. So again, we looked at this earlier and I was kind of blind. I didn't see any, content on the files. Well, now in the filters of this report, I might only look for, say, changes. So that'd be like ads would be included in that. But now I might say, I only want to see it if it's PCI DSS or if it's, whatever taxonomy, HIPAA. So I can limit this to maybe only show me just the files. And now, again, I have the same option as I did before, but I absolutely know that this file is PCI. So it makes it even that much more clear. So now the picture is much, much clearer as we go here and add more information. Now, we can also see all that great information we're used to in Netwrix, who did it, what they did, where they did it. So what you could do on top of this is just make sure these file share locations are up to par with permissions. So sensitive file and folder permissions could be an option here. So if we dive in, we might look at the permissions of, say, this accounting share. Maybe we make sure, we know now that there's all kinds of financial records and potentially credit card data, all kinds of different stuff going on in these file shares. Now, if you've ever used any of the file share reports in Netwrix before, you can really change around the view by using the filters. Always a good suggestion. Try those filters out. So what I might do is I'm going to show inheritance. I'm going to close the groups down. By default, this report shows the users. You can see some people are in here direct, but some are by group, and I want it all direct. I might say, give me all or one level or no subfolders, of course. I could look at the folders and files if I wanted to, or a specific, account. But let's go with the filters I picked here, and now I can really just dig into these permissions, make sure they're where I need them to be, whether it's on the accounting share or a subfolder of that accounting share. Make sure, do I want it to be the same as the parent? Maybe I do, maybe I don't, but it's just going to make it clear exactly where the permissions stand in these now known shares that have sensitive data. We know, no doubt. So what else we can do is maybe just take a look at potentially what is overexposed. So this is a nice report where it takes a look at the now sensitive locations and takes a good look at the permissions for you. And if any of the file shares that you now have sensitive PCI again or social security number data in, we'll show you if, say, those file shares have everyone access or authenticated user access. And I don't know what's going on with my lab. It's only when you need it the most does it take this long, I can tell you that. But it will come up here in just a second with some permissions, I hope at least. It worked earlier. My goodness. So you can see here once it comes up, I got my fingers crossed. Goodness gracious. Well, a lot of data to go through. Here we go. I don't know what my server's doing, something else, I can tell you that. But again, what this is showing me is potential overexposures. I do want to make that clear. You could have set these file shares up exactly how you meant to, and a public share has authenticated users. That could be exactly what you meant to do, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's an oversight that everyone's on that same public share. So what you might do here, depending on the share, is not always necessarily the same fix. This public share, I would definitely consider removing everyone. When it comes down to these other three shares where I have authenticated users in place, yeah, I can tighten permissions up on that Marine share. I can tighten up the permissions on SmithMD. Public's maybe not as easy. I want it to be a public share. It should be a public share. The problem is what I'm finding is people are saving things in there that they shouldn't be. So it would be really nice if I could use this tool that we've seen, and Graham's going to show you how to do this, to move the data, to make sure that this data, if it does end up here, it doesn't stay long. So again, I'm going to pass it right back over to Graham. He's going to show you how Netwrix data classification can help. Not only we've identified this problem, but fix the problem now as well. So.
Sure, okay. Let's go back to sharing my screen.
Looks good there, Grant.
Awesome. Okay, so yeah, so the question we're coming to is what do we do about these sort of issues? So what I'm going to quickly show you is I've kind of mocked up a similar sort of environment to Scott's. So I'm going to take a bunch of random documents and I'm going to put them in my public folder. A Netwrix data classification has been configured and it's watching all of these folders. Okay, so what it's going to do is it's going to be able to behind the scenes go ahead and scan all of these documents and identify sensitive data within them. And when it does that, it can take action. And while we wait for it to do that, I'll talk a little bit about what it can do. So obviously, the base level of what you can do with your sensitive data, where you find it, as we talked before, is you can use the resource, okay? You can look at these sensitive data reports, and there are additional reports within here, as well as the reports within Auditor. But we can do more things than that with Netwrix data classification. One of the things I can do is I can configure write classifications. So what I've done here is I've set up to write back a DLP filter label into my documents, okay, if terms match that particular thing. The idea being is that the DLP system I own can then use that metadata to control whether or not it restricts access and movement and dissemination of that particular data. So I want to go back and I'll show you what I did, and I set it up pretty simply. So it's another taxonomy, one I created. And here, so for my particular DLP, I might want to have a very sensitive, confidential type thing. I might want to have a sensitive or an unrestricted. And what I did here was I simply used the term boost clue type, which is a way of NDC of linking terms to other terms, to essentially say any document that tags to something in the PCI DSS or the PHI or the PII, so essentially any sorts of personal sensitive information is going to get flagged as sensitive. So what that then does is I can take this document, for example, and this is like an old style PowerPoint, and you can see this is a PowerPoint somebody's got in their user directory, and it contains a bunch of US Social Security numbers. So what the system has done, okay, is it has gone ahead and added this sensitive flag to that particular file. And it does it without, as a system update, so it doesn't change the modification date, doesn't change the modified by, it just adds this metadata to the file. And what that means is that any system that's, DLP system that's scanning this file, you'll be able to use this particular label to say, yes, don't let this document be communicated externally or moved any particular places you don't want it put, because we already know and it's flagged that it contains sensitive data. Now, what you can see is the quarantine folder that was empty is now no longer empty. And that is because we have been using the workflow capabilities within the Netwrix data classification tool to remediate documents that match certain criteria. So as you can see, we found this particular document here, and I'm going to use my favorite John Chalice. And as you can see, this original document contains kind of bio information and the passport number for this particular person. So that's not something we want to be kept in the public folder. But if we go down here, we can see the document does still exist in the public folder. But if we open it up, we can see that it's actually masked out, remediated, redacted that particular passport number. So we've left the file there, so anything that you might not be there, but we've removed anything that made it sensitive in this particular case. And we can do that with, pretty much all of the different types of Office documents, PDFs, that sort of thing. Again, we had a PowerPoint here, but with Social Security numbers again. Again, they've all been redacted out of this particular document. And the final one I wanted to say is this particular one is another type, okay? So this here is, albeit a fake, medical record for a fake person. So it contains a whole bunch of information about that person, procedures, all sort of things. So it's relatively hard, and certainly it would be hard to actually redact this to make it, safe. So the decision we've made here is for this sort of information, we don't want it in our public share at all. So we have removed it from the public share. But what the latest version of Netwrix data classification can do is we didn't just remove it and it's gone, which your users then be aware, well, my file's gone. We've actually left this stub here, which is a little text file that tells you this is where we moved it to. And so anybody with access can access the original file here, but it's no longer visible. It's no longer being exposed to it within your public share. So that allows you to, and this happened automatically. You saw that took it a few minutes based on these documents. So not only can you identify where documents are today, you can set up the system so that if anybody creates any documents in the future and they do not match within your rules, they put them in the wrong place, the system can automatically take action to remedy that situation and reduce your exposure. So let's kind of look a little bit under hood as to how that worked. So this is this workflows tab. So this essentially is how the system goes ahead and does that. And it's relatively straightforward to do. So I set up here a workflow to redact my sensitive data. And every workflow essentially forms the same set of things. We have rules that determine what triggers the workflow. Those rules are always based on classification of a particular document. And then we have an action that we take on that document. So the condition here is this strange looking term, workflow help with sensitive redaction. So I explained that every workflow is taken based on some sort of classification. You could just say, hey, any document that is classified, with a particular term, I want you to redact that particular document. But sometimes you want a combination of terms. You want to say if it matches these terms, but not these ones. And you might want to create some logic behind your decision as to whether you want to take an action on that particular document. So you can use any rules that you can come up with within the whole Netwrix data classification software to make those decisions. So in this case, I picked a whole bunch of sensitive type information that it matched. If it matches any of those, then it will trigger the workflow. Okay, so then you go on to the action. And there could be many actions. In this case, I just have a single action, and it's relatively straightforward. It's a migration. Where am I sending it to? Am I renaming it? If there's a clash, potentially I probably should have had set that up so that if two people create the same file or file with the same name in different places, it'll probably add a number to the end of it just to make sure that we keep all of the originals. This delete original item is essentially makes it into a move, but I'm not doing that here because what I'm doing is I'm redacting the original. Okay, and then you can have a redaction plan that actually you use to apply to that, and I'll show you that in a second. So, and it's as simple as that. It'll go ahead, and then every document, once it's classified, it's going to go ahead, check, and if it matches this particular term, it will move, it'll put a copy, the original copy, into the quarantine folder and redact the original. I created up a slightly different rule for my PHI. Again, very similar, except here we just check that create migration stub, and it creates those little text files which let you know where the file has been moved to. So if we nip back to our sources, actually to settings, under the settings here, we have redaction plans. So here you can set up your redaction plans. You can define what you want to replace. Do you just want to replace the whole thing? Do you want to mask it? This is what I was doing. I was retaining the last 4 characters of it. But you can configure that. You can configure the masking characters. You can just kind of redact the whole thing with replace the whole thing that we find with like something like that. So you can actually set up a pretty sophisticated plans as to how you want to redact your content. These are the supported file types that we can redact. The Office types, PDFs, text files, CSVs. So that covers pretty much everything you'd want to deal with. And again, you could, if you wish to, if you've got a redaction plan, if the file type, which you could write rules against, does not match one that we can redact, you can just move it and leave the stub in place instead. And the last thing I wanted to mention about workflows, let's kind of go. So we have, I'm just going to go and add this one here. So when you're adding an action, you've got, a whole bunch of stuff that comes out of the box. You can send email alerts. You can update the permissions of the files. Migrate is the one you saw. But you can also, or you can ask us to, create custom ones. So here's an example of a custom workflow that we created for a customer where it actually goes ahead and automatically raises a ServiceNow ticket for that particular, for the owner of the file when it identifies the one containing sensitive data. So that pretty much covers it. The last thing I wanted to quickly show you, give you an idea of kind of the full process that you're seeing here. So if you remember this BOM file that we saw at the beginning of here, which was mistakenly classified. So if I look in the properties here, you can see, it's actually cleaned it up. It's actually reclassified it and removed the sensitive flag from that file, so that's now empty. So it'll no longer. So once you fix the issues and reclassify the content, it will go ahead and update the tags based on your new rules. So that kind of gives you the confidence to be able to review your contact, run the system against it, validate the results that you're getting. If you have any issues in the results that you're getting, you can make the adjustments, and it'll go ahead and reapply those adjustments back against all of your content. Okay, so we still have time left. I'm not seeing a lot of questions. So what I'll do is I will start digging in a little bit deeper to some of this capabilities that we've been showing you and let you see a little bit more of what we can do. So I'm going to go back to the taxonomies entry, and I'm going to show you a little bit about some of the capabilities that this system has in a generic sense. So this is, as we mentioned before, is a general classification engine. And as we mentioned very early on, it builds a search index much like a search system does. And that has various benefits. It can do things like, you saw those DSAR requests. It can use a search index to help speed those up so that it can find the documents that match a particular person much more quickly. We can also use the search index for the purposes of when you're refining the taxonomies, when you're updating those results, it can reclassify content based on the index it made of the content without having to go back and touch all those source files again. So all that time you spent crawling your source file, extracting the text from it, matching it against the rules, that's not wasted if you're updating your rules. We've still got all of that information stored in the index. So if you refine your rules or you add more rules, we classify against that index. We do not have to go back and touch the original document unless or until it changes. So just to give you another quick idea, and it's sort of easily shown with kind of like something which is more like subject matter based, but hopefully you get the idea. So here I have, because I have a bunch of sample documents that are all agricultural research from the USDA, which is hence the reason I have this taxonomy. But because we have an index, so I want to find out documents that are talking about grapes. And because we have an index, I can actually go to the system and say, okay, look at all your documents and what other language do you have in there related to grapes, and tell me automatically. And that's what it just did. So it went ahead, and this is purely based on statistical analysis of the documents, but it could go and say that, it's talking about grape diseases, wine grapes, seedless grapes, grapevines, viticulture, botrytis, which is a disease on grapes. So it goes ahead, and in the context of your documents, can come up with other language that's statistically relevant. We have a customer at the moment from a security perspective who's using the same technology to look at recipes and formulas. And so what are the languages associated with that? What can I use to be able to help me find other documents that mention kind of recipes and formulas, which is sensitive information, not personally identifiable, but intellectual property. And so this sort of technology, you can give it examples of, hey, this particular document contains intellectual property, find me rules, clues that will help me find other documents that contain similar sort of things. So I can quickly select those that make sense and I can add them, and I'm building up my set of clues to help me identify documents, in this case, about grapes. So that kind of gives you a very rapid and brief overview of how the capabilities within this tool can be extended as much as you want beyond the kind of the standard out of the box taxonomies. And all of this capability that I've shown you, comes with the product. I think the workflows to take action on it is a custom module, but this ability to be able to add your own clues, refine your own clues, create your own taxonomies, that's all out of the box, and that's all standard with the basic product. Okay, so we are down to the last 9 minutes. Scott, do you have other things you want to comment on?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to wrap up. There's a few more things to talk about, so again, I was kind of sitting back here at my old use case now that you just knocked out of the park, Graham. So that was pretty awesome. Again, you can see my, no more data, secured sensitive data in the public share anymore. So that's pretty good. Just to kind of bring it all around too, again, we started back in the beginning, we were able to say, hey, a file got added, but we don't know what's in it. And then what we end up with is the ability to say, yeah, a file got added, but this file's got credit card data in it. So, we have that PCI DSS or whatever taxonomy. It could be any of them or all of them for that matter. And really just kind of bring this all around, help you identify and secure your sensitive data here. So I just wanted to kind of wrap it up. So we'll bring it back into the PowerPoint here. So we'll move on. We had some questions about this. So we have merged with StealthBits. So there's some new exciting things coming along. One of the biggest ones is SBPAM here. So we're going to help you introduce or help you meet Netwrix SBPAM. It's going to be on March 23rd at noon there Eastern. In this webinar, you'll learn how to, you can dramatically reduce risk associated with admin and service accounts, improve your compliance program, and close the gaps in Microsoft Labs with this award-winning solution. You can see there's a link there. Come join us for that one. That's probably going to be an interesting one. I'll be sitting in on that one, I bet. Any other questions? I think we've got most of them. Some of the big ones were about customization, whether that's only looking at certain sources, and that's absolutely possible. Crawling these sources in Office 365, whether it's SharePoint Online or Exchange Online, is absolutely possible. I think most of the questions we've answered out there. So if there's more, we're going to definitely send out the recording. You'll have all the links. You could always send us more questions if you have any, or reach out for a more one-on-one demonstration, of whether it's for Auditor or NDC or both. So we'd love to show you that. And keep moving here. We'll move on to the last one. I guess the last thing is I want to say thank you. Thanks for spending some time with us. I'll give Graham a second for him to say goodbye. And again, appreciate it. If there is any more questions too, we can. I know one I wanted to address too. Somebody asked, Graham, what version of Netwrix data classification are you using? It's a
So yeah,
pretty
this
shiny
is
new version
actually,
there.
it is a shiny new version. This is kind of a sneak preview of 5.6, which will be released shortly. So it's kind of in late beta. It's got a couple of new features that I wanted to include in this webinar. It's also got a snazzy new look about it, which syncs up nicely with the auditor look and feel as well. So it gives a more of a consistent approach to everything we're doing.
Yeah, very clean. I was impressed with it myself. So again, appreciate your time today. If there is any more questions, don't hesitate to send them out there. But other than that, we'll give you 5 minutes back of your day. Maybe go get an extra cup of coffee and have a good one, everybody. Appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks a lot for everybody attending. Bye, everyone.